History is a story we are still learning how to read. This is a journey through 35 historical mysteries where the experts cannot agree. These are not merely unsolved cases. They are active battlegrounds of interpretation, where a new discovery often deepens the argument instead of resolving it. By the end, you will see the human past not as a settled timeline, but as a living conversation filled with brilliant disagreement. We will explore why an entire civilization's political structure might vanish and question the true purpose of a 2,000-year-old mechanical device. These divisions reveal the complex, non-linear work of piecing together stories from fragments, and they challenge the very foundations of our shared history. Which ancient mystery do you believe we are closest to solving? Standing silent on the Salisbury Plain for millennia, Stonehenge is a riddle built from stone. Its purpose remains one of archaeology's most famous and fiercely contested questions, a perfect example of how a single monument can fracture expert opinion into multiple, compelling narratives. Is it a giant celestial calendar, its massive trilithons precisely framing the sunrise on the summer solstice? This astronomical theory is powerful, supported by clear alignments that would have marked the turning of the year for a Neolithic community deeply connected to the skies. Yet, excavation tells another story. The cremated remains of many individuals found at the site point strongly toward it being a vast domain of the ancestors, a sacred resting place and memorial site of profound spiritual importance. Then there are the smaller bluestones, transported over 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales. Their incredible journey suggests they were chosen for a special property, perhaps believed to possess healing powers, transforming Stonehenge into a prehistoric center of well-being and pilgrimage. Alternatively, the sheer scale of the coordinated effort required to build it, drawing people and resources from across Britain, implies it may have served primarily as a powerful political symbol, a project designed to unify disparate groups under a common cultural identity. Modern science has not settled the debate, it has amplified it. Laser scanning has revealed ancient carvings invisible to the naked eye, while analysis of the remains and the surrounding landscape provides stunning detail about the people who built and used the site. Yet each new data point seems to feed all the major theories equally. The astronomical alignments become more precise, the evidence of ceremonial practice grows richer, and the story of the Bluestone's journey becomes more complex. Rather than converging on a single truth, the research highlights how these purposes are not mutually exclusive. Stonehenge likely evolved over centuries, its meaning shifting from a burial ground to a temple, an observatory, and a symbol of power. The enduring division among experts, therefore, is not a failure of understanding but a recognition of the monument's layered and profound role in the ancient world. It was not just one thing, it was the center of their universe. While Stonehenge reveals a world of spiritual and celestial purpose, another ancient wonder presents a mystery of staggering physical scale. The Great Pyramids of Giza stand as monuments to a civilization's ambition, yet the very method of their construction remains archaeology's greatest logistical puzzle. How did a society without iron tools, pulleys, or the wheel move over 2 million stone blocks, some weighing more than 70 tons, and assemble them with near-perfect precision? This question has divided experts for centuries, splitting them between grounded engineering theories and more speculative possibilities. The traditional and most widely accepted explanation involves an enormous system of straight or zigzagging ramps made from earth and rubble. Workers would have dragged the massive stones up these slopes on sledges, perhaps lubricating the path with water to reduce friction. This theory is elegant in its simplicity, drawing from tools and methods we know the Egyptians possessed. Yet it faces immense practical challenges. The ramp needed to reach the pyramid's peak would have been almost as colossal as the structure itself, requiring an unimaginable volume of material and leaving behind a construction footprint that archaeologists have never definitively found. This absence of clear evidence has fueled alternative proposals. One compelling idea suggests the builders used an internal spiral ramp, a corkscrew tunnel built within the growing pyramid structure. This would solve the problem of an external ramp's massive size, but raises its own questions about stability and the engineering required to navigate corners with such heavy loads. Other theories venture into more speculative territory, proposing the use of water channels to float the blocks into position, or even the application of a form of ancient concrete, where the stones were cast in place rather than quarried. The divisions run deep because they touch on fundamental unknowns. Was the workforce a vast army of conscripted laborers toiling under harsh conditions, or a smaller, highly skilled cadre of well-treated workers who took pride in a national project? How were the stones, quarried from miles away, transported across the desert? And most baffling of all, how was the pyramid's base aligned to the cardinal points with an error of less than a fraction of a degree? Each new study, whether analyzing tool marks, studying worker settlements, or modeling ramp angles, adds data but rarely delivers a knockout blow to any single theory. The debate stays intensely alive precisely because the pyramids are a triumph that seems to border on the impossible with the technology we traditionally attribute to their time. This enduring mystery forces us to reconsider not just Egyptian capability, but the very nature of archaeological proof when the builders left no blueprints behind. The pyramids stand as a testament to human ingenuity, but another ancient story asks a far more intimate and haunting question about our own family tree. The fate of the Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary cousins, represents one of history's most profound and debated disappearances. For thousands of years, they thrived across Europe and Asia, adapting to harsh climates with robust bodies, sophisticated tools, and symbolic culture. Then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished from the fossil record. The mystery of why they disappeared and what role our own ancestors played continues to sharply divide experts, forcing us to confront the nature of early human interaction. One dominant framework points to direct competition. As Homo sapiens migrated into Neanderthal territories, we may have simply outcompeted them for crucial resources like food and shelter. This theory suggests our species possessed slight advantages in social organization, technology, or communication that, over generations, slowly pushed Neanderthal populations to the margins. A darker interpretation within this idea involves conflict, where encounters between groups could have led to hardship that further strained their numbers. However, painting a picture of outright warfare is largely speculative and not strongly supported by archaeological evidence. A second major theory shifts the blame from humans to the environment. The period of Neanderthal decline was one of intense climatic instability, with rapid swings between cold and warm periods. Neanderthals, physically adapted for colder climates and possibly reliant on hunting large game, may have found their traditional ways of life unsustainable as ecosystems changed. Their relatively small, scattered populations could have been especially vulnerable to these environmental pressures, dwindling away regardless of the arrival of modern humans. The third, and perhaps most revolutionary, framework is not one of replacement but of assimilation. Genetic research has revealed a stunning fact. Most people of non-African descent carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA within their own genome. This is undeniable proof that our species interbred. The question is one of scale. Did this mixing represent rare, isolated encounters, or was it a widespread and integral part of coexistence? Some researchers argue that Neanderthals did not go extinct in the classic sense, but were gradually absorbed into the larger, growing Homo sapiens population, their legacy living on in our very biology. The timeline itself is a battleground. Did their decline happen swiftly after modern humans appeared in a region, suggesting a direct link, or was it a drawn-out process over many millennia, pointing toward climate or a complex mix of factors? Each piece of evidence fuels the debate. Stone tool technologies show periods of potential overlap and even imitation between the groups. Studies of their diets suggest Neanderthals were highly adaptable, capable hunters. The genetic data shows interbreeding occurred, but also that Neanderthal populations may have already been genetically depleted, making them susceptible to absorption. This enduring division is about more than ancient demographics. It holds up a mirror to our own species. Does our history primarily feature competition and displacement, or connection and blending? The story of the Neanderthals remains unresolved because it asks the deepest question of all: what does it mean to be human, and were we alone in that definition? Etched across a vast desert plateau in southern Peru, the Nazca Lines present a mystery written on a monumental scale. These ancient geoglyphs, created by removing the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter earth beneath, form hundreds of straight lines, geometric shapes, and enormous figures of animals and plants. Some are so immense they can only be fully appreciated from the air, a fact that has fueled endless speculation about their purpose. The central division among experts is between those who see a practical function in the landscape and those who perceive a profound spiritual map. One prominent school of thought interprets the lines as a giant astronomical calendar or observatory. Researchers in this camp propose that certain lines point directly to celestial events on the horizon, such as the solstice sunrise or the rising of important stars, potentially marking times for planting or ceremonial cycles. The precision and scale suggest a society deeply invested in tracking the heavens. Yet, an equally compelling theory argues the lines had nothing to do with the stars and everything to do with the earth, specifically the life-giving water that was so scarce in this arid region. According to this view, the geoglyphs were sacred pathways, walked during rituals to plead with or honor deities believed to control rainfall and underground aquifers. The animal figures, like the hummingbird or the spider, might have been symbols or offerings to these forces. This ritual pathway theory transforms the desert from a canvas into a temple, where the act of walking the lines was itself a form of prayer for survival. The challenge for any theory is the stark lack of context. Unlike Stonehenge or the pyramids, the Nazca Lines are not associated with any major settlement or ceremonial center built alongside them. The people who created them lived in nearby valleys, leaving behind pottery and textiles, but the lines themselves stand in eerie isolation. This absence makes deducing intent incredibly difficult. Were they meant to be seen by the gods above, as the ritual theory suggests? Or were they functional markers for a society managing a fragile ecosystem? The sheer scale of the effort, maintaining these figures over centuries by clearing away wind-blown debris, indicates they held a significance that was central to the culture's identity and survival. This vacuum of definitive evidence has inevitably allowed more fringe ideas to flourish, most famously the notion that the lines were landing strips for ancient astronauts. While captivating to popular imagination, this theory is overwhelmingly dismissed by archaeologists, not only for its lack of evidence but because it overlooks the demonstrated ingenuity of the Nazca people themselves. The enduring division between the astronomical and ritual interpretations persists because both are logical, both are supported by certain alignments and cultural parallels, and both acknowledge the lines as a profound investment in the relationship between humanity, the cosmos, and the fragile desert world they called home. The mystery endures because the lines are a message we can see clearly from the sky, but whose meaning remains firmly grounded in a lost world of belief. The Nazca Lines demonstrate a civilization's profound connection to its environment, but what happens when that relationship breaks down catastrophically? The collapse of the Maya civilization during the so-called Classic period is a mystery of a different order. The question is not if their society transformed, but why its political and cultural heartland in the southern lowlands was largely abandoned over a span of roughly 200 years. Grand cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Kapan, once teeming with life and architectural splendor, fell into silence. This was not a single event but a slow unraveling, and the fierce debate among archaeologists centers on what primary force pulled the first thread. One compelling suspect is climate. Scientific analysis of lake sediment cores reveals evidence of a series of intense, multi-decade droughts that struck the region at the worst possible time. For a society dependent on seasonal rainfall for agriculture and drinking water, a prolonged dry period would have been devastating, leading to crop failure, famine, and immense social strain. The timing of these droughts aligns hauntingly well with the period of decline, making climate a prime culprit. Yet other experts point to the society itself. Maya art and inscriptions from the period depict not a peaceful realm, but one embroiled in escalating warfare. This was not merely ritualized conflict, but total warfare aimed at the destruction of rival city-states, the capture of their rulers, and the subjugation of their populations. This endemic conflict would have drained resources, disrupted trade networks, and shattered any sense of regional stability, making recovery from any external shock like drought nearly impossible. Intertwined with warfare is the factor of political instability. The Maya power structure was built around divine kings, rulers who claimed a direct connection to the gods. A series of military defeats or an inability to prevent famine would have catastrophically undermined this divine authority, leading to revolts, the abandonment of royal centers, and a complete loss of faith in the established order. Finally, there is the argument of environmental degradation. To build their great cities and sustain a growing population, the Maya cleared vast tracts of forest. This deforestation likely led to local climate changes, increased erosion, and the depletion of soils, slowly undermining the agricultural base that supported the urban elite. So which was it? The divisions run deep because the evidence supports all these factors simultaneously. Was it a top-down collapse where failed kings and incessant war crippled society just as drought arrived? Or was it a bottom-up ecological disaster where a stretched environment could no longer support the political superstructure, leading to conflict and fragmentation? The most likely answer, and the one that creates the most scholarly debate, is that it was a synergistic catastrophe. A severe drought would have intensified competition for resources, sparking warfare. That warfare would have prevented a coordinated response to the environmental crisis, while deforestation had already made the land more vulnerable. Different city-states may have fallen for different combinations of reasons, some succumbing primarily to conquest, others to famine, and others to a gradual dispersal of their populations. The Maya people did not vanish, their descendants thrive today. What collapsed was a specific, highly centralized political and economic system. The enduring mystery lies in weighting the causes, a complex calculus that forces us to ask whether this ancient collapse was a tragedy of nature, a failure of leadership, or a warning about the fragility of any society that strains its environment to the breaking point. While the Maya collapse unfolded over centuries, another ancient catastrophe struck with the swiftness of a storm. At the close of the Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, the brilliant, interconnected civilizations ringing the Mediterranean, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean palaces, the city-states of the Levant suffered a sudden and dramatic unraveling. In the records that survived, one name is repeatedly invoked as the agent of this chaos: the Sea Peoples. These enigmatic raiders appear in Egyptian inscriptions as a terrifying, faceless force from the sea, credited with toppling kingdoms. Yet their true identity remains one of history's most contentious maritime mysteries, a debate that hinges on whether they were a single destructive tide or the symptom of a world already falling apart. Egyptian pharaohs, notably Ramesses III, left vivid accounts of their victories against these invaders, depicting them in battle reliefs with distinctive feathered headdresses and carrying round shields. The texts list a confusing array of tribal names: the Peliset, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, but offer no clear map of their homeland. This ambiguity is the core of the archaeological divide. One school of thought views the Sea Peoples as a coherent mass of migrating groups, perhaps driven from their homes by famine or upheaval in their own lands, who moved en masse along the coasts, dismantling societies in their search for new territory. In this narrative, they are a primary cause of the collapse, an external shock that shattered a fragile international system. A second, compelling argument suggests they were not a unified ethnic group at all, but loose confederations of opportunistic pirates and mercenaries. In this view, the collapse came first, caused by a perfect storm of climate change, earthquakes, and internal rebellions that crippled central authority. The so-called Sea Peoples were a symptom, not the disease: maritime raiders who exploited the resulting power vacuum, attacking weakened cities for plunder. They might have been a mix of displaced sailors, soldiers of fortune, and refugees from the very regions that were crumbling, turning to raiding as a means of survival. The most frustrating aspect of the mystery is the stark lack of definitive archaeological evidence. Unlike other invaders, they left no distinctive pottery, no unique style of weapon, no settlements that can be clearly labeled as theirs. Researchers are left trying to correlate the Egyptian names with known cultures from the Aegean or Anatolia. Could the Peliset be the Philistines who later settled on the coast of Canaan? Could some groups be Mycenaean Greeks or displaced peoples from Western Anatolia? Each potential link is tantalizing but circumstantial, a puzzle where the text and the artifacts never quite align. The debate continues because it forces us to confront how history is written. The Egyptian records are propaganda, celebrating pharaonic power against a formidable, faceless enemy. But were these invaders a genuine migratory force? Or did Egyptian scribes lump together many disparate bands of raiders under one terrifying label to magnify their king's triumph? The Sea People sail through history as ghostly silhouettes, their true story lost beneath the waves, reminding us that sometimes the most feared names in history are the ones we understand the least. At the bottom of the Aegean Sea, encrusted in the wreckage of a Roman ship, a corroded lump of bronze and would lay waiting for 2,000 years. Its discovery in the year 1901, off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, would eventually send shockwaves through our understanding of ancient technology. When the encrusted fragments were first cleaned, intricate gear teeth could be seen, a sight completely out of place for an artifact of its time. This was not a statue or a simple tool. It was a machine, a complex assemblage of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears housed in a wooden case. The sheer existence of the Antikythera Mechanism forced a dramatic re-evaluation of Greek engineering, revealing a level of technical sophistication that historians once believed did not emerge until the Renaissance, over a millennium later. But for all the awe it inspires, a fundamental question divides experts. What was this astonishing device actually for? The dominant and most celebrated theory frames it as the world's first known analog computer, an astronomical calculator of breathtaking precision. Research, especially advanced imaging techniques like X-ray tomography, has allowed scientists to decipher inscriptions and model the gear trains. These models show the device could predict the positions of the sun and moon, track the phases of the moon, and even model the irregular orbit of the moon with a remarkable degree of accuracy. It likely displayed the timing of eclipses and the positions of certain planets. In this view, the mechanism was a pinnacle of scientific instrumentation, possibly used by astronomers or navigators to understand and forecast celestial events. Yet another school of thought offers a different, more philosophical purpose. Could it have been an elaborate teaching model, a demonstration device built not for practical computation, but to illustrate the elegant cosmic principles of Greek astronomy? This theory suggests it was a moving diagram of the heavens, a tangible representation of the orderly universe as conceived by thinkers like Hipparchus, intended for education in a wealthy patron's library or a philosophical school. Its complexity was not for generating new data, but for inspiring awe at the mathematical harmony of the cosmos. A third, simpler idea posits it was an incredibly sophisticated toy, a conversation piece for a wealthy individual to showcase their intellect and status. The division is profound because it speaks to the context we have lost. Was it a working scientist's tool, found on a ship because it was being transported to a center of learning? Or was it a luxurious collectible, looted from Greece to adorn a Roman villa, its true function appreciated more as art than science? Modern technology has brilliantly reconstructed how the mechanism worked, but it remains silent on the intentions of its maker and the daily life of its user. The gears tell us what it could do, but not why it was made or for whom. This brilliant anomaly stands alone, with no other device of comparable complexity found from the ancient world. It is a single data point of staggering significance, a glimpse of a technological path that history seemingly forgot. The debate over its function is a reminder that understanding an object requires more than just decoding its mechanics. It requires us to imagine the hands that held it and the minds it was meant to astonish. Far from the Mediterranean world, another civilization mastered stone to create a monument of power and trade. The massive, dry stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rise from the hills of southeastern Africa, a stunning complex of enclosures and towers that stood as the heart of a thriving kingdom from the 11th to the 15th centuries. For generations, its very origin was shrouded in a damaging colonial myth. European settlers, unable to accept that such an advanced structure could be the work of indigenous Africans, invented fanciful tales connecting it to the Queen of Sheba or Phoenician traders. This racist denial was a profound injustice, actively obscuring the truth of a magnificent African achievement. Modern archaeology has firmly and rightfully established the builders as ancestors of the Shona people, a consensus that corrects the historical record. Yet, settling the question of who built it has only opened deeper, more fascinating divisions about how this society functioned and why it ultimately changed. One major debate centers on the city's social and political structure. The ruins are divided into distinct areas: the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the valley complex. Were these separate districts for a ruling elite, religious leaders, and the general populace, reflecting a highly stratified kingdom with a powerful king or monarch? Or does the layout suggest a more fluid, hierarchical society where power was shared among different groups, perhaps elders, traders, and ritual specialists? The artifacts found within, like the famous carved soapstone birds, hint at spiritual authority, but how that authority translated into daily governance remains unclear. Equally contested is the scale and nature of Great Zimbabwe's wealth. The kingdom sat atop and controlled vast gold resources, which were traded inland to ports on the Swahili coast, connecting it to a global network reaching India and China. But was the city primarily a direct, centralized manager of this trade, with the king controlling all mining and exchange? Or was it more of a ceremonial and political hub that attracted wealthy merchants who operated with significant autonomy? The different interpretations paint different pictures of economic power, from a tightly controlled royal monopoly to a more open, market-driven system. Finally, there is the mystery of its gradual abandonment around the middle of the 15th century. The most common explanation points to environmental factors, suggesting that the large population and their livestock eventually exhausted the local resources, leading to deforestation and soil depletion. This ecological strain would have made sustaining the urban center difficult, prompting a dispersal to smaller settlements. However, other scholars propose that the decline was political and economic. A shift in international trade routes, perhaps bypassing the city, could have drained its wealth and influence. Internal succession disputes or the rise of competing regional powers might have also fractured the kingdom's cohesion. The truth likely involves a combination where environmental pressures exacerbated social tensions, leading to a reorganization of power and population. So, while the racist myths about its origins have been decisively debunked, Great Zimbabwe stands not as a solved puzzle but as an active site of inquiry. The consensus on its builders has empowered researchers to ask more nuanced questions about the inner workings of a sophisticated African state, its place in the medieval world, and the complex reasons even the most powerful kingdoms can transform. The stones no longer whisper of foreign phantoms, but of a real, vibrant society whose own story we are still learning to hear. Stretching for miles across the Breton countryside in France, the Karnak Alignments are a landscape turned to stone. Here, over 3,000 ancient menhirs stand in eerie, parallel rows, a silent army frozen in time. Unlike the clustered circles of Stonehenge, Karnak's power lies in its relentless linearity, thousands of individual stones placed with apparent purpose across an immense open space. This very scale and arrangement is what makes their meaning so elusive, resisting any single, tidy explanation and dividing experts into distinct camps, each armed with compelling logic. One prominent theory sees this vast complex as a prehistoric observatory on a truly grand scale. Certain alignments appear to point toward significant solar and lunar positions on the horizon, suggesting the stones could have functioned as a permanent, open-air calendar for tracking seasons, agricultural cycles, and celestial events. The precision required to establish such long sightlines would speak to a deep and sophisticated understanding of the skies. Yet, an equally persuasive argument views the stones not as a scientific instrument, but as a profound social statement. The alignments may have served as a colossal territorial marker, delineating the sacred or political domain of a powerful tribe. In this reading, the process of erecting the stones was as important as their final placement, a communal act that physically and spiritually rooted a people to the land, creating a permanent monument to their collective identity and strength. A more unconventional hypothesis proposes a practical function tied to the Earth itself. Some researchers note that the region is seismically active, and the stones are often placed atop major fault lines. Could the alignments have been an early warning system? The theory suggests that the stones, perhaps set in carefully balanced positions or with hollow bases, might have resonated or shifted in ways detectable to ancient observers, signaling underground activity. While intriguing, this idea remains speculative, lacking direct archaeological evidence. Perhaps the most resonant interpretation is a spiritual one, that Karnak was a sacred landscape dedicated to the veneration of ancestors. The orderly rows might represent lineages or clans, with the stones themselves acting as eternal markers for the departed, transforming the entire area into a vast, open-air memorial site connecting the living community to those who came before. Modern technology, like detailed geophysical surveys and laser mapping, has provided stunning new data on the alignment's exact positions and the subsurface features around them. Yet, rather than settling the debate, each new survey tends to fuel all the major theories equally. The astronomical alignments become more precisely measurable, the patterns suggesting territorial organization grow clearer, and the relationship of the stones to the natural landscape appears more intentional. The truth likely resides in a combination of these purposes layered over centuries. The stones may have begun as ancestral markers, their rows later extended to chart the heavens and proclaim a tribe's dominion over the terrain. Their enduring mystery lies in their silent multiplicity, a reminder that for ancient societies the practical, the spiritual, and the cosmic were never separate categories, but woven together in the very stones they placed upon the earth. On a remote island off the coast of what is now North Carolina, a single word was carved into a wooden post, Croatoan. This cryptic message was all that remained when a supply ship finally returned to the Roanoke colony in 1590, finding the settlement utterly deserted, its houses dismantled, and over 100 men, women, and children vanished without a trace. The fate of this lost English outpost is America's oldest missing persons case, and the divisions among historians and archaeologists are not about whether tragedy struck, but about the precise nature of its quiet, terrifying end. The debate centers on three compelling and often conflicting narratives of what happened after the governor, John White, sailed back to England for supplies. The first and most hopeful theory is one of integration. Proponents argue that the colonists, facing starvation and isolation, peacefully assimilated into nearby indigenous communities, most likely the Croatoan people on Hatteras Island, as the carved post suggested. This idea is supported by later European accounts from the Jamestown settlers decades later, who reported hearing stories of Englishmen living inland and even seeing European-style artifacts among some tribes. The dispersal theory presents a grimmer but plausible alternative. It suggests the struggling colony fractured into smaller, competing groups. Some may have tried to sail back to England in a makeshift boat and been lost at sea. Others might have ventured inland seeking help, only to succumb to illness, hunger, or conflict with groups unfamiliar to them. In this scenario, there was no single catastrophe, but a slow, scattered fading away with no survivors to tell the tale. The third framework is the catastrophe theory, which posits a single, devastating event. This could have been an attack by a hostile group, perhaps in retaliation for earlier tensions, or a sudden epidemic that swept through the settlement. A severe storm or a desperate, failed attempt to relocate could also have led to a rapid, collective demise. The frustrating heart of the mystery is that the scant archaeological evidence found so far can be interpreted to support multiple theories. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered a small number of 16th-century English artifacts, like a signet ring and gun parts, mixed with indigenous materials. Does this prove integration and trade, or merely plunder from a failed settlement? The search for the original colony site itself has been inconclusive, with potential locations offering hints of European life but no definitive, smoking gun, like a mass burial or a stockade indicating a last stand. Each new discovery, rather than providing closure, tends to refuel the debate. A modern analysis of tree rings suggests the colonists arrived during the worst regional drought in 800 years, making the integration theory seem more desperate and the catastrophe theory more likely. The carved word itself, Croatoan, was a pre-arranged signal meant to indicate a planned move to that island, but was it left as a truthful message or a deliberate misdirection to throw enemies off their trail? The enduring division reveals the limits of historical archaeology when faced with a story of such fragile human scale. Without written records or clear physical testimony, the line between assimilation, dispersal, and disaster becomes blurry. The lost colonists remain spectral figures, their final chapter a blank page that each generation tries to fill, not just with facts, but with our own understanding of hope, survival, and the perilous edge of a new world. Gazing across the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx presents a riddle carved from the living rock. This iconic guardian, with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, is officially attributed to the Old Kingdom pharaoh Khafre, builder of the Second Great Pyramid, dating its creation to around 2500 BCE. This orthodox view is based on traditional archaeological reasoning, linking its style, proximity to Khufu's pyramid complex, and a single, weathered inscription on a later stone slab. Yet, a powerful geological challenge has ignited one of Egyptology's most heated modern debates, suggesting the Sphinx may be thousands of years older than the pyramids themselves. The controversy hinges on the patterns of erosion on the Sphinx's limestone core body and the walls of the enclosure carved out around it. Geologists point to deep, vertical, undulating channels that appear to be the result of prolonged, heavy rainfall. The climate of Egypt has been overwhelmingly arid since at least 5000 BCE. However, the last period of significant, sustained rainfall in the region ended much earlier, around the end of the last ice age, perhaps as far back as 10,000 or even 12,000 years ago. If the erosion is indeed from rainwater, not wind and sand as the orthodox view holds, then the Sphinx's core structure must date to a much more ancient pre-pharaonic era, a time of lost civilizations only hinted at in myth. Egyptologists counter with powerful arguments from context and style. They note that the artistic conception of a monumental, recumbent lion with a royal human head is consistent with Old Kingdom symbolism, and that the entire Giza necropolis shows a cohesive architectural plan from that period. They argue that wind and sand, especially when combined with occasional dew and chemical weathering, can produce similar erosion patterns over millennia. Furthermore, they question where the evidence is for this hypothetical advanced civilization, pointing out a complete absence of its tools, pottery, or settlements in the archaeological layers from that distant time. This is far more than an academic dispute over dates. It represents a fundamental ideological divide about how we interpret the past. On one side is the established methodology of Egyptology, which builds history through the careful layering of evidence, artistic analysis, and cultural context. On the other is a reinterpretation of physical science where a single line of evidence, the stone itself, is used to challenge the entire historical narrative. The debate forces difficult questions. Could the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty have simply rediscovered, recarved, and adopted a vastly older monument? Does our current model of human civilization have a blind spot for potential peaks that rose and fell in deep prehistory, leaving only the most durable of monuments behind? The Sphinx sits at the crossroads of these questions, its silent gaze fixed on a horizon where geology and history stare each other down, neither willing to blink. A book exists that no one on Earth can read. The Voynich Manuscript is a small, fragile volume of about 240 pages, filled from edge to edge with elegant, looping script in an alphabet that matches no known language. Its pages are illustrated with bizarre, otherworldly plants that have never been identified, intricate astrological charts featuring unfamiliar constellations, and countless drawings of small, nude women bathing in what appear to be interconnected green pools. Since its modern rediscovery in the early 20th century, this single book has become the ultimate cryptographic puzzle, and the experts tasked with solving it are divided into three fundamentally opposed camps, each convinced they are looking at something entirely different. The first and most persistent theory is that the manuscript is a genuine cipher, a complex code designed to protect profound, perhaps dangerous, knowledge. Proponents of this view argue that the structured appearance of the text, with clear patterns and repetition, indicates a real language or a sophisticated encryption method hiding lost botanical wisdom, advanced astronomical insights, or alchemical secrets. For decades, top cryptographers, including teams from World War II code-breaking units, have applied every modern analytical technique, from frequency analysis to artificial intelligence, trying to crack its system. Yet, every apparent breakthrough has collapsed upon closer inspection, with proposed translations failing to produce coherent, replicable meaning. This relentless failure has fueled the second major school of thought, that the Voynich Manuscript is an elaborate and deliberate hoax. Perhaps created in the 15th or 16th century to be sold as a mysterious curiosity to a wealthy patron, the book could be a work of gibberish, its careful script and detailed illustrations crafted to mimic the appearance of knowledge without any underlying content. The most compelling evidence for this is the text's statistical properties, which, while strange, sometimes resemble the patterns produced by a simple cipher device from that era, one that could generate endless pages of plausible-looking nonsense. If it is a hoax, it is a masterpiece of deception that has fooled generations of brilliant minds. A third, more psychological theory offers a different kind of answer. It proposes the manuscript is an artifact of glossolalia, or automatic writing. In this view, the author, possibly in a trance-like or meditative state, produced the text as a stream of subconscious symbols, a personal spiritual document where the act of creation held meaning, but the words themselves were not meant to convey standard linguistic information. The illustrations would then be visual representations of inner visions, making the book a deeply personal devotional object, utterly opaque to anyone but its maker. The deadlock is absolute because modern computational linguistics, which can decode the structure of human language, hits a wall when faced with the Voynich text. It displays some features of language, yet defies all attempts to extract semantics. Historical analysis can place the vellum and inks in a rough time period, but cannot find a single reference to the book or its contents in any other document from the era. It is a ghost in the historical record, a beautiful, maddening anomaly. The divisions persist because each theory explains one part of the mystery while leaving another part utterly baffling. A hoax seems almost too perfect, a cipher too unbreakable, and a spiritual document too meticulously structured. The Voynich Manuscript, therefore, endures not just as an unsolved code, but as a mirror. We see in its strange pages exactly what we are looking for: a lost language, a clever fraud, or a window into a singular mind, proving that the most impenetrable mystery is sometimes the one we bring to the table ourselves. The Americas were the last continents to be reached by our human ancestors, a final chapter in the great story of global migration. Yet when exactly that chapter began, and how those first journeys unfolded, remains one of archaeology's most foundational and fiercely contested debates. For decades, the dominant narrative was known as Clovis first. This theory held that the earliest people, big game hunters distinguished by their distinctive fluted stone spear points, crossed from Siberia into Alaska via the Bering Land Bridge around 13,000 years ago. As the massive ice sheets retreated, they moved south through an ice-free corridor that opened in Western Canada, rapidly populating the continents. This clean, elegant model was supported by a wealth of Clovis sites across North America, all dating to a narrow window of time. It became textbook history. Then came a discovery in southern Chile that shattered the consensus. At a place called Monte Verde, archaeologists uncovered a seaside settlement complete with wooden tools, hearths, and preserved medicinal plants. The astonishing part was its age, reliably dated to at least 14,500 years ago, a full millennium before the Clovis culture emerged, and an impossible distance from the Bering Strait if those people had just come through an ice-free corridor. Monte Verde proved people were already living deep in South America long before the Clovis timeline allowed. This single site forced a dramatic paradigm shift, opening the door to the idea of pre-Clovis populations. But if people were here earlier, how did they get here? The ice-free corridor was still glaciated and impassable at that earlier date. This paradox gave rise to the coastal migration theory, a compelling but notoriously difficult to prove alternative. This hypothesis suggests that the first Americans were maritime adapted people who traveled not on foot through an inland corridor, but in boats skirting the edge of the Pacific coastline. They would have moved from Asia along the now submerged shorelines of Beringia and down the west coast of the Americas, using rich marine resources to sustain their journey. This route would have been viable even during the height of the ice ages, as the coastal fringe remained ice-free. The problem is evidence. The ancient coastline these travelers would have used now lies hundreds of feet underwater, submerged by rising sea levels, making direct archaeological proof extraordinarily elusive. Meanwhile, genetic studies of both modern indigenous populations and ancient remains have added another complex layer to the puzzle. DNA analysis broadly confirms a Siberian origin and supports a major migration pulse around the Clovis time, but it also reveals subtler, earlier genetic signals and suggests multiple separate waves of migration over thousands of years. Some studies point to a puzzling Australasian genetic signature found in some South American tribes, a faint echo of a journey whose story is completely lost. So the field is now in a state of vibrant, dynamic disagreement. Is the coastal theory correct, but its evidence forever drowned? Did multiple groups arrive at different times using different routes, some by coast and some later by land? Or does the answer lie in a combination where a small, pioneering pre-Clovis population came by sea, followed much later by the larger inland Clovis expansion? Each new discovery, whether a potential pre-Clovis tool in Texas or a genetic sequence from an ancient tooth, is scrutinized through these competing lenses. The debate is so heated because it strikes at the very origin stories of the hemisphere, challenging not just timelines on a map, but our understanding of human ingenuity and resilience in the face of a vast, unknown world. The timeline of human achievement was rewritten by a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is not a city or a palace, but a series of immense circular stone enclosures built over 11,000 years ago, a staggering 7 millennia before the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 15 tons and carved with elaborate reliefs of animals, were erected by a people who, according to every textbook, should not have been capable of such a feat. They were hunter-gatherers living before the invention of agriculture, pottery, or metal tools. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe ignited a firestorm in archaeology, directly challenging one of the field's most fundamental assumptions, that complex religion and monumental architecture are the products of settled farming societies. The excavators' revolutionary proposal is that here the sacred came first. They argue that this was a purely ritual center, a pilgrimage site where nomadic bands gathered at certain times of the year to worship, socialize, and undertake the colossal communal labor of building these stone circles. In this view, the urge to connect with the divine and create a shared ceremonial space was the catalyst that later spurred the development of agriculture, as a growing need to feed these seasonal gatherings encouraged people to cultivate the wild grains found in the surrounding hills. This turns the traditional narrative on its head, suggesting we built temples before we built homes. A significant faction of experts, however, pushes back with a crucial question: were the builders truly simple hunter-gatherers? They point to evidence that hints at a more settled, or at least a more socially stratified, society than the classic model allows. The sheer scale of the labor implies not just seasonal cooperation, but a level of organization, leadership, and resource management previously thought impossible without agriculture. Could there have been a more stable, resource-rich community in the area that supported specialist stoneworkers and overseers? Some researchers suggest that the people of Göbekli Tepe might have been practicing a form of early cultivation or intensive foraging that provided a surplus, blurring the line between nomadic and settled life. The debate is therefore a profound one about cause and effect. Does Göbekli Tepe represent a stunning exception that proves the rule, a unique flash of architectural genius by mobile people? Or does it reveal that our standard timeline is fundamentally wrong, and that social complexity, driven by spiritual belief, could emerge independently and even act as the engine for technological change like farming? The site forces a humbling reevaluation. Those towering pillars stand as a silent rebuke to our neat categories, proving that the human drive to create meaning and monument can erupt in the most unexpected of times, rewriting the story of civilization's first spark with every stone unearthed. The silence of an ancient script can be just as loud as a monument's collapse. On the sun-baked island of Crete, the brilliant Minoan civilization left behind stunning frescoes, sprawling palace complexes, and a unique system of writing known as Linear A. Unlike its successor, Linear B, which was triumphantly deciphered in the 1950s and revealed to be an early form of Greek, Linear A has stubbornly guarded its secrets for over 3,000 years. This elegant script, inscribed on clay tablets and religious objects, represents one of linguistics' most enduring and divisive puzzles, a code that resists cracking because experts cannot even agree on what kind of lock they are facing. The central division is fundamental. Is Linear a record of a known but lost branch of human language, or is it the sole written evidence of a tongue that stood completely alone? One major school of thought employs the comparative method, attempting to link Linear A's symbols and potential sounds to known language families from the region. The most persistent candidate is a form of Luwian, an Anatolian language spoken in ancient Turkey, given the clear cultural connections between Crete and Anatolia. Others have proposed links to Semitic languages or even early Greek dialects. Researchers in this camp analyze the script structure, looking for recognizable prefixes, suffixes, or word patterns that might align with a known linguistic relative. They painstakingly compare the sign shapes and potential phonetic values to those in later, deciphered scripts, hoping to find a genealogical key. Opposing this approach are scholars who argue Linear A represents a language isolate. This means it may have no surviving relatives, a unique linguistic branch that grew, flourished, and was eventually cut off by history, leaving no descendants for us to compare it to. If this is true, then the comparative method is useless. The script is a locked door for which we have no matching key, and decipherment would require a theoretical Rosetta Stone, a bilingual inscription that does not appear to exist. The practical obstacles are immense. The corpus of Linear A is frustratingly small, consisting of only around 1,400 inscriptions, many of which are short administrative lists of commodities or offerings. These texts provide limited context. They lack the rich narrative content, like myths or royal decrees, that could offer clues through repeated phrases or recognizable names. Without a longer text or a clear bilingual link, every proposed decipherment remains trapped in the realm of speculation, a house of cards built on assumed phonetic values that cannot be independently verified. This stalemate is more than an academic curiosity. It leaves an entire dimension of the Minoan world mute. We can admire their art and walk through their palaces, but we cannot hear their prayers, their laws, or their poetry. The debate between the linguists seeking a family connection and those confronting a solitary language forces a humbling realization. Some voices from the past may speak in a dialect we are no longer equipped to understand, their stories encoded not just in symbols, but in a lost way of hearing the world itself. The silent language of Linear A remains a locked archive, but on a remote Pacific island, another ancient people left a message written in stone that we can see but cannot fully hear. The massive stone heads, or moai, of Easter Island stand as some of the most recognizable statues on Earth, their solemn faces gazing inland from coastal platforms. For generations, the central mystery was why a small, isolated society would invest such immense effort in carving nearly 1,000 of these colossal figures. Yet, as research has shifted, a more practical and fiercely debated question has taken center stage. How did they move these multi-ton giants from the quarry to their final positions, sometimes over 10 miles away? The division among experts is not about possibility, but about method, a clash between a long-held, almost mythical image and a newer, counterintuitive theory grounded in physics. The traditional and visually compelling narrative is that the islanders walked the statues upright. In this scenario, teams of workers used a system of ropes to rock the moai forward in a careful, swaying motion, effectively making the statue walk itself across the landscape. Proponents point to oral traditions that seem to describe the moai walking with mana, or spiritual power, and argue that a skilled crew could have moved a statue hundreds of feet per day using this method. It creates a powerful mental picture of these stone giants majestically progressing across the island. However, a rival theory, championed by archaeologists and engineers, proposes a far less dramatic but potentially more efficient process: horizontal transport. This idea suggests the moai were laid flat on a wooden sled or atop a track of lubricated logs, and then pulled in a prone position. Advocates for this method cite the clear evidence of wear on the roads, which shows central grooves that could have guided a sled, and the simple fact that a lower center of gravity makes a toppled statue far more stable and less prone to catastrophic, irreversible damage during transport. The debate has moved decisively into the realm of experimental archaeology, with both sides attempting to prove their case through physical reconstruction. Teams trying the walking method have shown it is theoretically possible with small, concrete replicas, but the process is incredibly delicate, requiring perfect coordination and posing a constant risk of the statue's base chipping or snapping. Conversely, experiments with horizontal sledges on prepared tracks have demonstrated that a surprisingly small crew could move a multi-ton weight with steady, controlled progress. Soil analysis has added another layer, with some researchers finding that the ancient roads were deliberately paved with crushed local rock to create a firm surface, which better supports the idea of a sled or rolling system rather than the uneven, rocking motion of an upright statue. Yet neither side can deliver a definitive proof. No eyewitness accounts exist, and the island's ecosystem was so transformed by the time of European contact that key evidence, like the specific types of wood used for ropes or sledges, is lost. The division persists because both methods are plausible with the materials available, and both carry risks. The walking theory honors the oral history and the awe-inspiring spectacle, while the horizontal theory emphasizes practical engineering and risk mitigation. This is not merely an argument about ropes and rocks, it is a debate about how we perceive the past. Do we envision our ancestors as achieving the seemingly impossible through ritualized communal effort or through clever, grounded problem-solving? The moai themselves hold their silence, having reached their platforms by one of these forgotten roads, their journey complete but their method still marching through the halls of academic dispute. Their cities were marvels of order and foresight. The Indus Valley civilization, centered on the great urban centers of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, flourished for centuries across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Unlike many other ancient societies, its streets were laid out in a precise grid. Its homes featured advanced drainage and sanitation systems, and its artifacts show a stunning lack of militaristic imagery. There is little evidence of palaces for god-kings or grand monuments to conquest. Instead, the archaeological record paints a picture of a stable, prosperous, and seemingly non-violent society focused on trade, craftsmanship, and civic planning. This very stability makes its eventual decline, beginning around 1900 BCE, so perplexing and divisive for experts. The mystery is not one of a dramatic, fiery end, but of a slow, quiet fading, and the debate centers on whether the primary cause came from the skies, the rivers, or from within the society itself. One of the most powerful theories points to a profound environmental shift. Geological and climate data suggest the region's life-giving monsoon rains began to fail or shift their pattern dramatically. A prolonged period of drought would have been catastrophic for an agricultural society, leading to crop failures, famine, and the gradual abandonment of cities as people dispersed in search of reliable water. This climatic stress could have been the primary engine of collapse. A related and equally compelling hypothesis focuses on the rivers themselves. The civilization was built around the mighty Indus River and its tributaries. Evidence suggests that some of these crucial waterways changed course, possibly due to tectonic activity or silt buildup. A major river diversion would have left entire cities stranded, turning fertile farmland into desert and severing the transportation networks that fueled trade and cohesion. Imagine a bustling port city slowly watching its harbor dry up into a sand flat, its economic lifeline gone. Yet other scholars argue the decline was more social than environmental. They propose that the very uniformity and centralized control that made the civilization successful may have become its weakness. As trade networks with distant partners like Mesopotamia faltered, perhaps due to shifts in demand or political changes elsewhere, the economic foundation weakened. This could have led to rising social unrest, a loss of faith in the governing systems, and a gradual fragmentation as communities turned inward, prioritizing local survival over the grand urban experiment. The divisions are sharp because the evidence on the ground is so ambiguous. There are no layers of ash from a great conflagration, no mass graves suggesting a sudden catastrophe, and crucially, no signs of invasion by outside forces. The cities were not destroyed, they were simply left, their orderly bricks slowly reclaimed by the dust. This absence of a clear villain or single catastrophic event forces archaeologists to weigh subtle, interlocking factors. Did a changing climate trigger a migration that then strained social systems? Did failing trade lead to conflict between cities over dwindling resources, even if that conflict left little archaeological trace? The story of the Indus Valley civilization's transformation is a humbling lesson in resilience and fragility. It suggests that a society can be brilliantly engineered for peace and prosperity, yet remain exquisitely vulnerable to the slow, relentless pressures of a changing world, its quiet end leaving behind not ruins of war, but the ghostly blueprint of a lost harmony. The serene order of the Indus Valley stands in stark contrast to an object of profound and contentious reverence. Housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, a single piece of linen cloth, measuring approximately 14 feet long, bears the faint, haunting imprint of a man who appears to have suffered a traumatic death. To millions of the faithful, the Shroud of Turin is not merely an artifact. It is the very burial cloth of Jesus, its image a miraculous photograph from the moment of resurrection. For scientists, it is one of the most intensely studied and debated objects in the world, a mystery where empirical evidence and deeply held belief collide with no possibility of compromise. The central division is absolute, forged by a single, pivotal event in 1988. In a highly publicized study, 3 independent laboratories performed radiocarbon dating on a small sample of the shroud. Their conclusion was definitive. The linen threads dated to between 1260 and 1390, squarely within the medieval period. For many in the scientific community, this was the final word, proof the shroud was a remarkable but human-made creation from the Middle Ages. Yet the story did not end there. Almost immediately, researchers questioning the findings proposed alternative explanations that could invalidate the carbon-14 date. One prominent theory suggests the sample taken was not representative, arguing it came from a medieval patch used to repair the cloth after a fire in the 1500s, a fire that itself could have introduced carbon contaminants. Other studies point to complex chemical processes, proposing that a potential microbial biofilm on the fibers or a reaction from the intense heat of the fire could have altered the carbon signature, making the linen appear centuries younger than it truly is. The debate then extends to the image itself. How was it formed? Skeptics point to medieval artistic techniques, suggesting a form of early photography or a simple rubbing method could account for the negative, three-dimensional qualities of the imprint. Proponents of authenticity counter with the image's inexplicable precision, noting it contains forensic details about Roman crucifixion practices that were not fully understood by historians until the modern era, and that no pigment or binding medium has been found within the fibers themselves. This is where archaeology, materials science, and faith become irreconcilably intertwined. For a believer, the carbon dating is a test of faith, an obstacle to be explained by imperfect science. For a scientist, the image's unexplained properties are a fascinating puzzle, but not proof of the supernatural. The two sides speak different languages, one of empirical evidence and repeatable testing, the other of sacred tradition and spiritual truth. Every new paper, whether analyzing pollen grains, blood chemistry, or weave patterns, is immediately filtered through these opposing lenses, each camp finding confirmation of its own view. The shroud, therefore, is more than a cloth. It is a mirror reflecting our modern struggle to reconcile two powerful ways of understanding the world. It remains the ultimate locked room mystery, where the key seems to lie just beyond the reach of both laboratory and sanctuary, ensuring its power to divide and fascinate will endure for generations to come. Across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, from Britain to Hungary, people have unearthed small, mysterious objects that defy explanation. Known as Roman Dodecahedra, these are hollow, bronze creations, each about the size of a large apple. They possess 12 flat pentagonal faces, and at each corner sits a small knob. The most baffling feature, however, is the circular hole of a different diameter piercing every single face. Hundreds of these intricate items have been found, often in places like military camps, public baths, and settlements, yet not a single shred of written record or artistic depiction from the Romans themselves mentions what they were for. This total silence has turned them into a classic archaeological enigma, a puzzle where every proposed solution feels both perfectly logical and utterly insufficient. The range of speculative functions is a testament to human ingenuity, both ancient and modern. One popular theory casts them as practical tools for knitting or crafting, suggesting the knobs could be used to form consistent stitches for gloves, with the holes sizing the fingers. Yet, nowhere patterns on the bronze support this repetitive use, and no accompanying needles or thread have been found with them. Others see them as sophisticated surveying instruments, perhaps for calculating distances or optimal planting dates by aligning sunlight through the different holes. Their geometric precision makes this idea compelling, but their delicate construction seems ill-suited for rough field work. A simpler proposal is that they were decorative candle holders with a wax taper placed in each hole, but the metal shows no consistent signs of soot or heat discoloration. Perhaps they were gaming dice for a complex, forgotten board game, or weights for a fisherman's net. Then there is the spiritual interpretation that they were sacred objects used in religious rituals or as symbols of status within mystery cults, their geometric perfection holding esoteric meaning. The sheer variety of these guesses reveals the core of the mystery. In a civilization that documented so much of its daily life, from military pay slips to dinner party menus, how could an object produced in such numbers across such distances leave not a single clue to its purpose in the historical record? Each theory fits some of the evidence, yet is contradicted by another piece. They are found in different contexts, but never in graves as common personal items might be. They show little wear, arguing against daily manual use. Their design is standardized yet shows minor variations, suggesting they were not mass-produced for a single, rigid function. This complete absence of context forces us to confront a humbling possibility that a seemingly common object from one of history's most documented empires can become utterly alien to us. The dodecahedra represent a profound disconnect, a whisper of daily Roman life whose meaning has been completely erased by time, reminding us that sometimes the most intimate secrets of the past are not hidden in tombs, but in the ordinary things they left behind without a second thought. The story of a people's liberation is one of the most powerful narratives ever told. The biblical account of the Exodus, where the Israelites escaped slavery in Egypt and journeyed to a promised land, is a cornerstone of faith and identity. Yet when archaeologists search the sands of Egypt and the Sinai for evidence of this epic migration, they find a profound and often contentious silence. This absence has created one of the most polarized debates in historical archaeology, splitting experts into two deeply opposed camps with fundamentally different views on how to read the past. On one side are the minimalists, scholars who argue the Exodus story is a powerful foundational myth, crafted centuries after the events it describes to unite the Israelite nation during the period of the kingdoms. They point to the complete lack of Egyptian records mentioning the enslavement and flight of a significant population, and note that extensive surveys in the Sinai Peninsula have found no trace of a large group wandering there for 40 years in the relevant time period. For them, the narrative's power lies in its theological and national meaning, not in its historical factuality. On the other side, researchers propose more nuanced historical possibilities. They suggest that if an exodus occurred, it may have been on a much smaller scale, involving a clan or a group of Semitic laborers rather than a nation of hundreds of thousands. This smaller event could have left a fainter, almost invisible archaeological footprint. Others look to a different timeline, proposing that the story preserves a memory of the expulsion of the Hyksos, a Semitic people who ruled parts of Egypt before being driven out around 1550 BCE. Alternatively, some connect it to a period of general unrest in Canaan, where the rise of early Israelite settlements in the Central Highlands during the Late Bronze Age might reflect a social revolution from within, a story later framed as a divine journey from abroad. The debate is fueled by intriguing but ambiguous clues. Certain sites in the Sinai and the Negev show evidence of small, temporary settlements from the Right General era, though nothing conclusively linked to the biblical narrative. The names of some locations mentioned in the Exodus story appear in later Egyptian texts, but this could reflect knowledge of the landscape, not the event itself. This division is about more than pottery shards and ancient inscriptions. It is a clash of methodologies. Is the absence of evidence evidence of absence, or does it simply mean we are looking in the wrong way or for the wrong thing? The search for the Exodus forces us to ask what history is made of. Is it the recoverable facts of grand events, or the enduring stories a people tell about their own origins, stories that shape reality just as powerfully as any pharaoh's decree? High above the modern city of Cusco, the stone walls of Sacsayhuamán command the landscape with a silent, staggering authority. These are not simple stacked blocks, but a monumental jigsaw puzzle carved from granite, where individual stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are interlocked with such precision that a knife blade cannot slip between them. The zigzagging walls rise in 3 colossal tiers, a feat of engineering that draws universal awe. Yet, for all its physical grandeur, the true purpose of this site remains a mystery that divides archaeologists, forcing them to choose between seeing it as a fortress, a temple, or something entirely more symbolic. The name itself, often translated from Quechua as satisfied falcon, offers little clarity, and the Spanish chroniclers who witnessed the site in the 16th century left frustratingly contradictory accounts. Some described it unequivocally as a formidable fortress, a military stronghold where the Incas staged their last stand against conquest. The location supports this, perched on a hill with commanding views and massive, defensible walls. Yet other chroniclers wrote of it as a royal house or a ceremonial temple, a place for rituals and important gatherings. This split in the historical record is the foundation of the modern debate. The fortress theory seems the most obvious. The zigzagging design of the walls creates deadly flanking fields for defenders, and the sheer scale of the stones would have made the structure nearly impervious to siege engines. It fits the narrative of an empire that needed to secure its sacred capital. However, critics of this view point out that the interior layout lacks clear features of a permanent garrison, like barracks or extensive storage for sieges. This leads to the temple or ceremonial center theory. Perhaps Sacsayhuamán was primarily a spiritual site, where the zigzagging walls represented lightning or the teeth of the sacred puma, whose outline the city of Cusco was said to form. In this reading, the vast plaza was a stage for imperial rituals, a place to demonstrate the Incas' divine connection and political power to assembled multitudes. A compelling third idea merges the practical and the sacred, suggesting it was a royal estate, a combination of fortified retreat, administrative center, and holy place for the emperor. The most enduring mystery underpinning all these theories is the how. The polygonal masonry, with its complex, irregular shapes fitting together perfectly without mortar, represents a construction technique that seems to defy the tools and time frames we attribute to the Incas. Some propose an astonishing process of trial and error where stones were repeatedly shaped, test-fitted, and adjusted over generations. Others look to symbolic or even lost techniques, wondering if the stones were softened or shaped with plant compounds, a theory that remains speculative. The precision is so extreme it suggests a function beyond mere stability, perhaps an intentional demonstration of the Incas' ability to harmonize with and master the very bones of the earth. This stonework was not just engineering, it was a statement. So, was Sacsayhuamán a shield, a church, or a crown? The divisions persist because the evidence is monumental yet mute. Each theory captures a facet of the truth. It was likely all these things at once, a physical manifestation of Inca ideology where military power, royal authority, and sacred geography were inseparable. The walls do not tell us their single purpose, they show us the immense, interconnected world of the people who built them. One of the most visually arresting and baffling objects from the ancient world sits quietly in a museum. Known as the Lady of the Spiked Throne, it is a small, intricate model of a wheeled procession, crafted from terracotta and steatite around 4,000 years ago in the Indus Valley. A central female figure sits regally on a throne bristling with spikes, while attendants pull the cart on wheels and a bull's head protrudes from the front. This is not a broken fragment but a complete, singular scene, and its very uniqueness is the source of its enduring mystery, because nothing like it has ever been found in the vast Indus archaeological record. Experts are left to argue over its meaning with almost no points of comparison, creating a division between those who see a sacred ritual and those who perceive a secular story. One compelling interpretation views the entire tableau as a ritual object, perhaps used in a religious ceremony or festival. The spiked throne could be a symbolic representation of a sacred platform, and the procession might depict the transport of a deity or a priestess through the city. The bull, a potent symbol in many ancient cultures, reinforces this spiritual reading, suggesting a connection to divine power or fertility. In this light, the lady is not merely a passenger, she is a goddess or a human representative channeling the divine. Yet, an equally valid theory proposes it is a sophisticated toy or a storytelling device. The wheels are functional, and the careful modeling of figures suggests a narrative. Could this be a depiction of a royal or communal event, a diorama meant to educate or entertain. The spiked throne might then be a simple representation of a decorated carriage, its spikes merely artistic conventions for tassels or ornaments, stripped of deeper ritual meaning. This debate is so intense precisely because the Indus Valley civilization left us no deciphered texts and very few figurative artworks to provide context. We have seals with animals and script standardized weights and those remarkably planned cities, but almost nothing that shows us a scene from daily life or mythology. The Lady of the Spiked Throne is that rare, vivid snapshot, but we have no other photos to put in the album beside it. Is she an echo of a widespread religious practice that simply hasn't been found elsewhere, or is she a one-of-a-kind creation, a master artisan's vision that stands outside the norm? Each expert's interpretation tells us as much about our own assumptions as it does about the object. Those looking for spiritual meaning find it in the throne's imposing form and the ceremonial nature of a procession. Those looking for the human touch find it in the whimsy of a wheeled cart and the possibility of play. The artifact itself offers no further clues, holding its secrets close. It is a masterpiece of ambiguity, a single sentence from a lost epic, leaving us to wonder forever about the story of the lady on her strange and spiky chair. Carved from single blocks of solid basalt, each one a monument in its own right, the Olmec colossal heads stand guard in the humid lowlands of ancient Mexico. These immense portraits, some weighing over 20 tons, depict faces with distinctive features, wearing what appear to be tight, helmet-like headgear. They are the unmistakable signature of Mesoamerica's first great civilization, a culture that laid the groundwork for all that followed. Yet, for all their imposing presence, these heads are silent sphinxes, and the question they pose is deceptively simple: who is staring back at us? The answer divides experts sharply, because identifying these figures would unlock the very nature of Olmec power. One prominent theory holds that they are portraits of specific, powerful rulers. The unique facial features, full lips, broad noses, and sometimes even individualized expressions, suggest these were real individuals commemorated in stone to project their authority and legacy across the landscape. In this view, each head is a king, a permanent declaration of a dynasty's reach. A competing idea proposes they represent revered ball players. The headgear strongly resembles the protective helmets worn in the sacred Mesoamerican ball game, a ritual that blended sport, politics, and cosmology. Honoring a champion in this eternal stone could signify his divine favor or his role in maintaining cosmic order through the game. Others see them as deified ancestors, founding figures of lineages whose watchful presence continued to bless and legitimize their descendants' rule. A darker, though less supported, interpretation suggests they are monuments to defeated enemies, their captured likenesses displayed as trophies of war and dominance. This debate is not merely about art history, it cuts to the heart of a larger mystery. What kind of society were the Olmecs? The colossal heads are among the only clear clues we have to the concept of individual power in a culture with no deciphered written records. Do they signal a centralized kingdom with a single, god-like ruler capable of commanding the labor to quarry and transport these stones from distant mountains? Or do they point to a network of competing chiefdoms, each erecting its own leader's image in a display of regional rivalry? Perhaps the society was a theocracy, where the depicted individuals were high priests whose spiritual authority, not just political might, justified such a staggering investment of communal effort. The heads themselves offer frustratingly few additional clues. They were not found in tombs, nor are they accompanied by inscriptions naming their subjects. Their original placements, often on ceremonial platforms, suggest public veneration, but the exact context of that veneration is lost. This forces archaeologists to read the social structure from the scale of the objects alone. The sheer effort required extracting the basalt, transporting it dozens of miles without the wheel or draft animals, and then carving it with stone tools, implies a highly organized society with leaders who could mobilize and feed a large workforce for projects that served ideological, not practical, ends. The division over the head's identity, therefore, reflects our struggle to hear the whispers of individuality in a silent past. Are we looking at the faces of history's first-named Mesoamerican kings, or at symbols of a power that was still collective and mythic? Each theory paints a different picture of Olmec glory, from a land of rivaling city-states with proud rulers to a unified realm under a priestly elite. The colossal heads endure not just as stone, but as a profound question about how power first carved its face into the world, leaving a visage we recognize but a name we will never know. The faces of ancient kings stare from stone, but a ghost ship from the 19th century offers a mystery of a different kind. The fate of the Mary Celeste is perhaps the most famous maritime enigma of all, a tale that lives in the shadowy space between documented history and enduring legend. Found adrift in the Atlantic in December 1872, the ship was in near-perfect condition, its sails partially set, and its cargo of industrial alcohol largely intact. Yet not a single soul was on board. The captain, his family, and the entire crew had vanished without a trace, leaving behind personal belongings, a fully provisioned lifeboat, and a ship that showed no clear signs of a struggle. This pristine abandonment is what has fueled over a century of speculation, dividing researchers into competing camps, each with a theory that explains some of the evidence but leaves critical questions unanswered. One of the most persistent and scientifically grounded theories involves the cargo itself. The Mary Celeste was carrying over 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. Some experts propose that fumes from the alcohol leaked into the hold, perhaps after a barrel stave loosened in rough seas. The crew, smelling the potent vapors and fearing an imminent, catastrophic explosion, might have made the desperate but rational decision to temporarily abandon ship in the lifeboat. The tragedy in this scenario came afterward. The rope connecting the lifeboat to the ship may have snapped, or a sudden squall could have swept them away, leaving the crew to the mercy of the open ocean while the ship, which never exploded, sailed on as an empty monument to their miscalculation. Other theories point to human conflict. The possibility of mutiny has long been discussed. Could tensions between the captain and his crew, or among the sailors themselves, have boiled over into violence? Perhaps a struggle led to loss of life, with the survivors then fleeing in the boat. Yet, the complete absence of any signs of violence on the meticulously examined ship severely undermines this idea. Similarly, an attack by pirates was a common fear of the era, but pirates would have almost certainly taken the valuable cargo and plundered the personal effects, none of which occurred. The ship was found fully provisioned, making piracy an illogical culprit. A more naturalistic explanation points to the sea itself. The area where the Mary Celeste was found is known for sudden, violent waterspouts and rogue waves. A massive, unexpected wave could have struck the ship, causing everyone on deck to be swept overboard and swamping the lifeboat. The captain's log, found on board, had its last entry dated 10 days before discovery, suggesting a sudden, catastrophic event interrupted the voyage. However, a wave powerful enough to clear the deck of all hands would likely have left more significant structural damage to the vessel, which was noted to be seaworthy and only taking on a little water when found. The enduring power of the mystery lies in the frustrating preservation of the evidence itself. The ship was not lost at sea, it was recovered, it was studied. And yet, its very intactness provided no clear answers, only a haunting tableau of interrupted life. Each theory fits a piece of the puzzle, but leaves another piece glaringly out of place. The alcohol fumes theory explains the haste of departure. but not why an experienced captain would abandon a perfectly sound ship without first securing a line to the lifeboat. The mutiny theory accounts for disappearance, but not the lack of violence. The rogue wave theory explains suddenness, but not the ship's remarkable condition. This is why the debate continues unabated. Without a single piece of conclusive forensic evidence, a note, a definitive sign of struggle, or the discovery of the lifeboat, every explanation remains in the realm of plausible speculation. The Mary Celeste is a locked-room mystery on the high seas, a story where the setting is perfectly preserved, but the characters and the crucial page of the script have been torn out. It forces us to confront the limits of historical reconstruction, reminding us that sometimes the most compelling stories are those where all the clues are present, yet the truth remains just beyond the horizon. In the arid sands of the Tarim Basin in western China, a discovery emerged that seemed to rewrite geography itself. Here, under the relentless sun, archaeologists uncovered mummies with astonishingly preserved clothing, hair, and facial features that appeared distinctly Caucasian. These individuals, dating back as far as 4,000 years, were found thousands of miles from Europe, buried in the heart of Asia. Their very existence ignited a firestorm of debate, forcing experts to confront a profound question about the ancient world. Were these people lone travelers from a distant West, or evidence of a forgotten chapter in human prehistory? The mystery of their origins cuts directly against simple maps of ancient ethnicity and culture, revealing a past far more interconnected and surprising than we once believed. One major theory proposed a dramatic long-distance migration. This narrative suggested these individuals were part of a westward trek from the steppes of what is now Ukraine or southern Russia, a journey of epic scale across mountains and deserts. Their woven woolen textiles and felted hats bore striking resemblance to those found in cultures to the west, and the wheels of their carts echoed designs from the distant Eurasian plains. In this view, the Tarim Basin was a remote frontier settled by hardy pioneers from another world. However, groundbreaking genetic research has complicated this elegant story. DNA analysis reveals these mummies were not recent migrants, but rather a deeply isolated population with ancient North Eurasian ancestry. They showed no signs of mixing with contemporary steppe pastoralists or farmers from the nearby mountains during the time they lived. This suggests they were not newcomers, but possibly the last remnant of a much older, widespread Indo-European-speaking population that had once stretched across Inner Asia. Their isolation in the Tarim Basin became a refuge, preserving a genetic and cultural snapshot that had vanished elsewhere. A third, emerging perspective weaves these threads into an even more complex tapestry. It sees the Tarim mummies not as isolated relics or lone migrants, but as key players in a nascent network of exchange. Their location sits at a future crossroads of the Silk Road. While genetically isolated, their material culture, from their woven plaid patterns to their techniques for making cheese, shows clear influences and borrowings from neighboring regions. This paints a picture of a people who are biologically distinct but culturally engaged, trading ideas and goods along routes that would one day link continents. The debate, therefore, is a clash of narratives. Does their physical appearance signal a mass movement of people, or does their unique genetics highlight a story of survival and resilience? Their presence challenges any rigid notion of ancient cultural boundaries, proving that physical appearance, language, and material goods could travel in different ways and at different speeds. These remarkably preserved individuals are more than a collection of artifacts. They are a silent rebuke to the idea that the ancient world was made of separate, static worlds. They force us to see the Tarim Basin not as a dead end, but as a dynamic chamber in the heart of Asia, where stories from across the continent converged and were preserved in the dry, forgiving sand. A small clay jar from ancient Mesopotamia holds a secret that seems to defy its time. Discovered in the 1930s near what was once Baghdad, this unassuming artifact consists of a terracotta pot, a rolled copper cylinder, and an iron rod suspended inside it. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine, the two dissimilar metals would create a chemical reaction, producing a small but measurable electric current. This simple assembly has ignited one of archaeology's most captivating controversies, forcing a choice between seeing it as a 2,000-year-old battery or dismissing it as something far more mundane. The division is stark, pitting a vision of ancient technological curiosity against a more conventional interpretation of ritual storage. Proponents of the electrochemical theory argue it was a primitive galvanic cell, a device perhaps used for electroplating, applying a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metals through an electrical process. Alternatively, the mild current could have served a medical purpose, used for the therapeutic application of small shocks, a practice known in other ancient cultures. To support this, researchers have built exact replicas, demonstrating that the design can indeed produce a low voltage, proving the physical principle was within their grasp. Yet, skeptics offer a powerfully simple counter-argument. They see the object not as a technological device, but as a sacred container. In this view, the jar was a vessel for storing precious scrolls of papyrus or parchment. The iron rod was a protective spindle around which the scroll was wound, and the copper cylinder was merely a protective casing, all sealed within the clay pot to safeguard important religious or administrative texts from moisture and decay. This interpretation aligns with common storage practices of the era and requires no leap into speculative technology. The debate remains unresolved because the critical evidence is missing. No such jar has ever been found with wires attached or electrodes connected, nor have any electroplated objects from that period been conclusively linked to its use. They exist as isolated finds without a clear archaeological context that places them in a workshop, a temple, or a healer's kit. This absence is the heart of the mystery. It forces us to ask whether the ancient world occasionally stumbled upon principles it did not fully understand or systematically develop. The Baghdad Battery, if that is what it was, stands as a tantalizing might have been, a single, silent component in a circuit of history that was never fully connected, leaving us to wonder if a spark of modern knowledge flickered briefly in a distant age, only to be forgotten. Scattered across the river deltas and jungle floors of Costa Rica lie objects of impossible geometry. The stone spheres of the Diquis culture are not rough carvings, but near-perfect orbs, some as large as 8 feet in diameter and weighing over 15 tons, shaped with a precision that seems to defy their ancient origins. Their surfaces, crafted from hard granodiorite, are unnervingly smooth, a testament to a lost technique of pecking, grinding, and polishing that could have taken generations for a single sphere. These enigmatic objects, dating from around 600 to 1500 CE, present a silent, spherical puzzle, and the experts tasked with solving it are sharply divided between those who seek a practical function in the landscape and those who perceive a deeper, celestial symbolism. One school of thought grounds the spheres in the tangible world of social structure and astronomy. Given that many were found arranged in lines, triangles, or parallelograms near the entrances to important dwellings or in plazas, a compelling argument is that they served as territorial markers or symbols of status and authority. A prominent family or chieftain might have displayed these orbs to denote their lineage, power, or control over resources, transforming them into permanent, physical claims embedded in the earth. Alternatively, researchers have noted that certain alignments of spheres might correspond to astronomical events, such as the rising of significant stars or solstice sunrises. In this reading, the spheres could have been a sophisticated, three-dimensional calendar or observatory, their positions carefully set to track the passage of time and seasons for a society deeply attuned to the cosmos. Yet an equally powerful interpretation argues that their meaning was never purely functional. The quest for perfect roundness, an immensely difficult achievement with stone tools, suggests the shape itself was the message. Many scholars believe the spheres are symbolic representations of celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, or even the full moon, acting as permanent, earthly anchors for cosmic forces. They might have been seen as containers of spiritual energy or as mythological objects from creation stories, their flawless form embodying ideals of perfection, unity, and the divine order of the universe. In this view, their placement was likely ceremonial, integral to rituals that connected the community to the heavens and to the ancestors. This debate is intensified and in many ways paralyzed by a modern tragedy of archaeology. When the spheres were rediscovered in the 20th century, many were looted or forcibly moved from their original sites to adorn government buildings, private gardens, and town squares. This well-intentioned but destructive relocation severed the spheres from their archaeological context, the very soil, structures, and companion artifacts that could have whispered clues about their use. It is as if someone took the hands from a clock and scattered them, leaving us to admire their shape but forever unsure of the time they were meant to tell. We can study the spheres themselves, their composition, their craftsmanship, but we cannot see the patterns they formed in relation to homes, tombs, or the horizon line. This loss of context makes it nearly impossible to statistically prove an astronomical alignment or definitively link a specific arrangement to a social function. Consequently, each theory exists in a state of plausible speculation. The astronomical hypothesis is elegant but difficult to verify without precise original coordinates. The social status marker idea is logical, but without knowing which dwellings were most associated with the largest spheres, it remains a general principle. The celestial symbol theory is resonant but inherently difficult to disprove. The spheres, therefore, sit at the crossroads of these interpretations. Their silent, perfect forms a reminder that some of the past's most stunning achievements are also its most self-contained mysteries. They challenge us to understand that sometimes the most profound meaning an object can hold is not in what it was used for, but in the sheer, dedicated will it took to make it, to shape the chaos of stone into an enduring vision of the perfect and the eternal. The collapse of the Bronze Age world was not the end of a single story, but the simultaneous failure of an entire system. Across the Mediterranean and Near East, the brilliant, interconnected kingdoms of the late 2nd millennium BCE, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the powerful city-states of the Levant and Cyprus, suffered a stunning, synchronized unraveling. Palaces burned, trade routes fell silent, and literacy itself vanished from entire regions. This was not a slow decline but a precipitous fall, and the search for its cause has become the ultimate detective story in systemic archaeology, a case where every clue points to a different suspect, and the experts remain bitterly divided on whether to indict a single killer or an entire conspiracy of catastrophes. One of the most dramatic suspects is the invasion of the Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders immortalized in Egyptian inscriptions. Pharaoh Ramesses III claimed a great victory against them, his reliefs depicting a chaotic naval battle. But were these invaders the primary cause of the collapse, or merely opportunistic scavengers feeding on a world already dying? The evidence is frustratingly sparse, their origins and even their unity as a group hotly contested. They could have been a migratory wave pushed by famine from their homelands, or simply pirates exploiting a growing power vacuum. A more insidious culprit lies in the climate itself. Tree ring and sediment core data from the period reveal evidence of a prolonged, severe drought that gripped the eastern Mediterranean. For societies dependent on predictable harvests to feed dense populations and support lavish palaces, a multi-decade drought would have been catastrophic. Famine would have strained social contracts, sparked internal rebellions, and made kingdoms vulnerable to any external shock. This theory transforms the collapse from a military event into an ecological tragedy, a slow squeeze that drained the resilience from these complex states. Then there is the Earth itself. The region sits along major fault lines, and archaeological layers from several sites show evidence of massive destruction consistent with earthquakes occurring in a relatively short time frame. A series of powerful quakes could have shattered the physical infrastructure of power, the palaces, the storage facilities, the fortification walls, in a matter of moments. This natural disaster theory suggests the collapse was a tragic accident of geography, a domino effect of tremors that toppled civilizations already living on unstable ground. Technology itself may have played a disruptive role. The widespread adoption of ironworking, while still in its early stages, began to undermine the economic foundation of the Bronze Age elite, whose power was partly built on controlling the scarce sources of tin and copper needed for bronze. At the same time, changes in military tactics and weaponry could have shifted the balance of power, allowing smaller, more agile groups to challenge the great kingdoms. This is a theory of innovation as a destabilizing force, where new knowledge eroded old hierarchies. The most compelling and most debated framework is the perfect storm model. This view rejects the search for a single prime mover. Instead, it argues that all these factors — drought, earthquakes, internal unrest, technological shift, and raiding — converged in a deadly synergy. A kingdom weakened by famine would be less able to repair earthquake damage. A trade network disrupted by piracy would prevent the shipment of food to starving regions. The failure of one system placed unbearable strain on the others until the entire interconnected web snapped. Here, the division among experts is fundamental, a clash of philosophical approaches. Should we seek a neat, singular explanation, or must we accept that history, like nature, can sometimes produce a cascade of bad luck that even the most brilliant societies cannot withstand? The evidence varies starkly by region, suggesting that in Anatolia, earthquakes may have been the final blow, while in Greece, internal rebellion might have been the key. This lack of a uniform cause is perhaps the most telling clue of all, pointing not to a single disaster, but to a world that had grown so tightly linked, so interdependent, that when one pillar began to crumble, the entire grand structure was doomed to follow. Found in the labyrinthine ruins of a Minoan palace, the Phaistos Disc is a small circle of fired clay that holds a universe of speculation within its palm-sized diameter. Its face is a crowded gallery of 45 distinct symbols, everything from human heads and birds to shields and flowers, each one stamped into the clay with a precision that suggests a prepared set of punches. This singular technique is part of the mystery. No other artifact from Minoan Crete uses this method of impression. The disc is a message, but from whom and in what language? The attempts to answer that question have created one of archaeology's most polarized and wearying debates, a field where brilliant decipherment claims rise and fall with the regularity of the tides, and where a significant number of experts hold a far more radical suspicion that the disc is not ancient at all. This skepticism is not born from cynicism, but from the object's profound isolation. It was discovered in 1908 in a context that some argue could have been contaminated. More damningly, not a single other example of its script, or even its unique stamping method, has ever been found in over a century of intensive excavation across Crete. For some scholars, this singularity is a red flag. They propose the disc could be a clever forgery from the early 20th century, a period rife with archaeological frauds created to capitalize on the fame of Minoan discoveries. If genuine, it is an anomaly so stark it seems to defy the very nature of how writing systems develop and spread. For those who accept its antiquity, the battlefield merely shifts. Assuming the symbols represent a true writing system, what kind of system is it? Is each stamped pictograph a logogram standing for a whole word or concept? Or is it a syllabary where each sign represents a syllable, like in Linear B? The divisions here reflect fundamental disagreements about the disc's very purpose. One camp sees it as a genuine narrative text, perhaps a hymn, a treaty, or a royal decree. Their decipherment efforts, often assigning phonetic values based on comparisons to other Mediterranean scripts, produce translations ranging from prayers to goddesses to accounts of maritime voyages. Yet none of these readings have gained universal acceptance, as they frequently rely on speculative linguistic links and produce results that cannot be independently verified. A second major interpretation strips away language entirely. Perhaps the disc is not writing, but a ritual object. The spiral arrangement of symbols could outline a ceremonial pathway, a sequence of images to be meditated upon or used in a divination practice. In this view, the symbols are not meant to be read aloud, but to be seen and internalized, a visual liturgy pressed into clay. An even more utilitarian theory suggests it could be a game board, with the symbols representing spaces for a forgotten game of chance or strategy, the spiral path tracing the movement of pieces. Then there is the geometric argument, which proposes the symbols form a purely decorative or symbolic pattern, a complex mandala with aesthetic or religious meaning, but no linguistic content whatsoever. The debate is frozen, locked in a stalemate created by the disc's lonely existence, without a second example to compare it to, or a bilingual inscription to act as a key. Every proposed decipherment remains an elegant hypothesis built on a foundation of sand. It is a codebreaker's ultimate torment, a seemingly complete message with no way to calibrate the code. The Phaistos Disc therefore stands as a different kind of mystery, one that asks us to consider the limits of our own understanding. It challenges our need for everything to be a readable text, forcing the humbling possibility that some of the past's most carefully crafted messages were meant for a different kind of reading, one whose rules have been utterly lost to time. A masterfully forged blade from the Viking Age bore a name that became a legend. Etched into the steel of some of the finest swords ever found from that era is a single, powerful inscription, Ulfbert. These weapons were not ordinary. Their strength, flexibility, and sharpness were so superior they seemed almost magical to those who faced them in battle. The mystery is not who Ulfbert was, a maker or perhaps a guild, but where on earth this nearly pure, high-carbon steel came from. The division among experts cuts to the heart of medieval technology. Was this a product of global trade or evidence of a lost European innovation? Metallurgical analysis confirms the swords are made of crucible steel, a material with a very low slag content, making it incredibly strong and less brittle. This quality of steel was not known to be produced in Europe on any significant scale until centuries after the Viking Age. The closest known source for such material at the time was the Islamic world, specifically regions in modern-day Iran and Central Asia, where smiths had mastered the complex process of creating crucible steel, often referred to in later periods as Damascus steel. This leads one compelling school of thought to envision long-distance trade routes, where Viking traders acquired raw ingots of this precious steel, perhaps through the river systems of Eastern Europe connecting to the Volga trade route, and brought them back to be forged by their own master smiths, who then stamped them with the Ulfbert name. The swords, in this view, are stunning artifacts of a connected medieval world, yet another faction of researchers challenges this import theory. They ask, if the steel was all imported, why is the quality of Ulfbert blades so inconsistent? Some are indeed made of that superb, pure steel, while others bearing the same name are of markedly lower quality, as if they were copies or used inferior local materials. This inconsistency fuels the argument for local production. Could a small number of European smiths, perhaps in the Frankish Rhineland where many of these swords have been found, have rediscovered or independently developed an advanced smelting technique to create their own high-quality crucible steel. This would have been a rare, guarded secret, explaining both the exceptional blades and the many inferior imitations that followed. The debate remains heated because the science reveals the what but not the where. Chemical analysis can trace impurities and isotopes, but the results so far have been ambiguous, unable to definitively fingerprint the ore's origin to a single mine in the east or the west. Each new sword analyzed adds data, but often deepens the puzzle. Were the Vikings merely the middlemen, the distributors of a foreign technological marvel? Or were they, at least in a few secret workshops, the pioneers of a metallurgical leap that history later forgot? The Ulfbert swords, therefore, are more than weapons. They are keys to a locked door in the history of technology, and we are still searching for the right map to tell us where that door was built. Deep beneath the rolling hills of Zhejiang province in China, a vast and silent underworld defies explanation. The Longyou Caves are not natural caverns, but an astonishing complex of 24 gigantic grottos, each one painstakingly carved by hand from solid sandstone. The scale is almost incomprehensible, with the largest chamber covering an area larger than a modern football field, its ceiling supported by massive, sculpted pillars. Every surface, from the soaring walls to the vaulted ceilings, is marked with a uniform, parallel chisel pattern, a testament to an organized, relentless workforce. Yet for all this staggering effort, the caves present archaeologists with a blank slate, a mystery carved from absence. No artifacts, no inscriptions, not a single tool or scrap of pottery has been found inside. No historical text from any dynasty mentions their construction. This complete silence forces experts to become architectural detectives, reading the stones themselves to debate a single, monumental question: why would a society dig this? The theories are as grand as the spaces they try to explain. One compelling idea sees the caves as a colossal imperial project, a secret subterranean storage bunker, or a fortified refuge for a ruler or an army. The sheer, uniform engineering suggests central planning and immense resources, fitting for a state-level undertaking. Yet, if it was storage, what was stored? And why leave no trace of whatever filled these vast halls? A more pragmatic theory proposes the caves were simply a quarry, mined for the high-quality sandstone to build cities or monuments above ground. The consistent chisel marks and the sheer volume of removed rock support this. But this raises its own puzzles. Why carve such beautiful, symmetrical rooms with decorative pillars and carefully angled ceilings? A quarry operation would likely have been far more haphazard, focused on extraction, not aesthetics. This leads to the spiritual interpretation. Could the Longyou Caves have been a ceremonial complex, a sacred underworld designed for rituals connected to the earth or the ancestors? The careful preservation of the pillars, which appear to be left in place rather than cut from freestanding rock, suggests they were always meant to be part of the design, perhaps symbolizing trees or mountains holding up the sky in a mythological realm. The immersive, awe-inspiring atmosphere of the chambers feels intentionally spiritual, a man-made landscape meant to humble and transform those who entered. The engineering only deepens the mystery. How did the ancient workers illuminate these deep spaces to carve with such precision? The soot marks one would expect from thousands of torches are absent. How was ventilation managed so effectively in windowless rooms buried underground? Most baffling of all are the pillars. Their placement does not follow a logical grid for structural support. Instead, they seem almost randomly distributed, yet the ceilings have held for millennia. This suggests the builders possessed a profound, intuitive understanding of load-bearing and rock mechanics, achieving stability through a design that looks chaotic to the modern eye. With no written records or material remains, every interpretation is a reflection in a dark pool. The tomb theory falters without any resting places. The quarry theory struggles with the refined finish. The storage theory confronts empty rooms. The ceremonial theory, while resonant, lacks any altars or religious iconography. The caves are a pure expression of intent without a revealed purpose, a monument to a process whose final goal was either never realized or was so complete that it left nothing behind but the breathtaking space itself. They stand as a reminder that some of humanity's greatest works were not meant to be filled with things, but with meaning, a meaning that has evaporated into the cool, still air, leaving us with nothing but wonder and a forest of stone. Among the fragile, ancient texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one document stands utterly apart. While the others contain sacred scriptures and community rules, the Copper Scroll is a stark list, etched in metal, detailing vast quantities of buried treasure. It speaks of tons of gold and silver, hidden across the Judean wilderness in locations with cryptic, poetic names. This singular artifact has cleaved experts into rival factions, each convinced they hold the key to a mystery that is either a literal fortune or a profound metaphor. The central division is absolute. One camp reads the scroll as a precise, factual inventory, a secret record of treasures rescued from the Second Temple in Jerusalem before its destruction in the year 70. The meticulous measurements, the specific numbers of talents and vessels, all point to a real, desperate effort to hide sacred wealth from Roman legions. In this view, the Copper Scroll is a genuine treasure map, its clues waiting to be deciphered by the right explorer. Yet, the scroll's peculiarities fuel a powerful counterargument. Its language is awkward, its grammar strange, and many of the location names, like the Cave of the Column or the Valley of the Shadow, do not correspond to any known geography. This has led many scholars to propose it is not a map at all, but a work of religious allegory. The treasures could represent spiritual blessings, and the act of finding them a metaphor for the pursuit of divine wisdom, their burial sites symbolic rather than physical. A third, more skeptical perspective dismisses it as pure folklore, a piece of imaginative fiction or a compiled list of legendary treasures never meant to be taken literally. This debate has not remained confined to libraries. The scroll has launched 100 expeditions, sending modern adventurers with shovels and ground-penetrating radar into the stark canyons near the Dead Sea. They have searched for the ruin in the valley and the pool of the fountain, following clues that seem to shift like the desert sands. A few tantalizing discoveries have been made, like ancient tunnels or small caches, but nothing approaching the scroll's described tonnage of precious metal. Each empty hole deepens the puzzle. If it is an allegory, why go to the extraordinary expense and effort of inscribing it on durable copper, a material chosen for permanence? If it is a real map, why encode it with such obscure, almost mythical references? The Copper Scroll endures as a perfect paradox, a document that demands to be taken seriously by its very form, yet whose content seems to retreat into legend. It forces us to ask what we are really searching for when we look for treasure. Is it the gold itself, or the enduring human hope that somewhere, hidden in the landscape, a secret from a lost world is still waiting to be found? The main avenue of Teotihuacan runs straight as an arrow, yet it points slightly away from true north. This deliberate deviation in the city's grand central axis, known as the Avenue of the Dead, is a permanent architectural question etched into the landscape. For a civilization that oriented its entire urban plan with such breathtaking precision, this choice was clearly intentional, and the reason for it has split experts into two distinct camps, each seeing a different compass guiding the builder's hands. One prominent theory looks to the heavens, arguing the avenue is aligned with the setting point of the Pleiades star cluster. To the people of ancient Mesoamerica, the Pleiades held profound significance. Their annual disappearance and reappearance in the night sky marked critical times in the agricultural and ceremonial calendar. Aligning the city's spine with this celestial event would have woven the cosmos directly into the fabric of daily life, transforming the entire metropolis into a giant astronomical instrument. Every procession down the avenue would have been a walk under the gaze of these sacred stars. The opposing theory, however, grounds the alignment firmly in the earth. It points to the looming presence of Cerro Gordo, the massive mountain that dominates the northern horizon. In Mesoamerican cosmology, mountains were not just geographical features, they were living deities, sources of water, and portals to the underworld. By orienting the Avenue of the Dead directly toward Cerro Gordo, the city's planners may have been paying homage to this mountain god, ensuring a symbolic and spiritual connection to the source of life-giving rains and the realm of the ancestors. The pyramids lining the avenue would then act as artificial mountains, mirroring the sacred natural form in the distance. This is more than a debate about angles and sightlines. It is a fundamental disagreement about how the Teotihuacanos viewed their place in the universe. Did they primarily chart their existence by the timeless, predictable cycles of the stars, or was their world anchored by the enduring, tangible power of the earth itself? The evidence on the ground complicates the answer, as both alignments are plausible and culturally resonant. The Pleiades were universally revered, and Cerro Gordo was an undeniable physical presence. This division among researchers highlights a profound truth about Teotihuacan's genius. Its design likely synthesized both celestial and terrestrial sacred geographies. The avenue may have been laid out to satisfy a complex spiritual equation, honoring the mountain while also capturing a key stellar event on specific dates. The slight deviation from true north becomes a compromise, a brilliant architectural solution to align with two different poles of belief. The silent stones of the avenue do not tell us which alignment came first in the planners' minds, but they powerfully show us a society that built its world as a perfect reflection of the cosmos as they understood it, a bridge between the stars above and the sacred earth below. Cut into the green hillside of Dorset, England, a giant looks over the landscape. This is the Cerne Abbas giant, a colossal figure 180 feet tall, outlined in the white chalk bedrock. With his club raised and his features boldly pronounced, he is a spectacle of folk art and a riddle of origins that has divided experts for centuries. The central debate is stark: is this a survivor from the deep pagan past, or a cheeky political statement from the turbulent 17th century? One compelling theory sees in the giant the echo of an ancient god. His powerful stance and raised club bear a striking resemblance to classical depictions of Hercules, a figure of strength and fertility whose worship may have been brought to Britain by the Romans. Local folklore has long associated the hill with healing and fertility rituals, and the giant's prominent features only reinforce this connection to an earthy, pre-Christian deity. For proponents of this view, the figure is a sacred geoglyph, a permanent invocation of primal power meant to bless the land and its people. Yet, the historical record tells a different and surprisingly silent story. The first written mention of the giant appears only in the late 1600s, in a region meticulously documented by antiquarians and mapmakers for centuries. Such a prominent feature going unmentioned seems almost impossible if it were truly ancient. This glaring absence fuels the rival theory that the giant is a much later creation, a piece of subversive political satire. According to this narrative, the figure was cut in the 1660s as a caricature of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector who ruled England after the Civil War. Depicting him as a naked, club-wielding brute would have been a potent insult by royalist sympathizers, mocking his puritanical rule as hypocritical and brutish. The giant, in this light, is not a god but a gag, a rebellious piece of graffiti on a national scale. Modern science stepped in to try to settle the argument, but instead deepened the mystery. Researchers used a technique called optically stimulated luminescence dating, which measures how long buried soil has been hidden from sunlight. By testing the deepest chalk layers at the giant's edges, they could estimate when the figure was first cut and the soil last exposed. The results were startlingly ambiguous, pointing to a range from the early medieval period right through to the early modern era. The data did not rule out an ancient origin, but it also comfortably included the 17th century. This scientific stalemate means both major theories remain in play, each supported by a different kind of evidence. The folklore and the classical parallels argue for antiquity, while the historical silence and the political context argue for a later, pointed creation. Perhaps the truth is even more layered. Could the giant be a medieval creation, later recut and emphasized during the political strife of the 1600s, its original meaning forgotten and overwritten? The hill itself holds its secret tightly. Every few decades, the community must re-chalk the giant, scraping back vegetation to keep his lines pure and white against the green. This act of maintenance is a tradition that connects the present to the past, regardless of which past it truly is. The Cerne Abbas giant endures not as a solved equation, but as a conversation between two very different Englands, one of mythic gods and one of earthy satire, both permanently etched into the same enduring hill. Across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, a city once thrived that rivaled any in its time. Cahokia was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, a sprawling metropolis of earthen mounds, bustling plazas, and a population that may have reached 20,000 at its peak around 1100 AD. Its central monk's mound rises as high as a 10-story building, a colossal feat of engineering built basket by basket of earth. Yet by the year 1400, this vibrant heartland was silent, its grand plazas empty and its great mounds standing as lonely sentinels over a dispersed population. The mystery of Cahokia's decline is a study in quiet unraveling, a collapse with no obvious villain, where experts are left to debate which internal thread was pulled first to make the entire social fabric come apart. Unlike the Maya, there is no evidence of a cataclysmic invasion or a conquering army at Cahokia. The end did not come with fire and sword, but with a gradual dispersal, a fading away. This absence of an external enemy forces archaeologists to look inward, examining the society's own relationship with its environment and with itself. One prominent suspect is the very landscape that sustained the city. To build the mounds, maintain dwellings, and fuel daily life for thousands, Cahokia's inhabitants would have engaged in extensive deforestation. Clearing trees for miles around could have led to severe erosion, topsoil washing away into the river, and a degradation of the local ecosystem that supported their agriculture. This theory of environmental overexploitation suggests the city may have quite literally consumed its own foundation, slowly undermining its ability to feed its people. Closely linked to this is the powerful role of climate change. Scientific data from tree rings and soil cores indicates the region experienced significant fluctuations during Cahokia's later centuries, including periods of intense drought and unpredictable rainfall. For a society dependent on maize agriculture, a series of poor growing seasons would have been devastating. A prolonged drought could have led to food shortages, famine, and immense social strain, testing the authority of the leaders who likely claimed a connection to the spiritual forces governing rain and harvest. This brings us to the possibility of social and political unrest. Cahokia was almost certainly a highly stratified society, with a ruling elite living atop the great mounds overseeing a large population of farmers, artisans, and laborers. In times of plenty, this system could be stable, but in times of environmental stress and scarcity, the social contract would have been severely tested. Did the people lose faith in their leaders when prayers for rain went unanswered and granaries grew empty? Could internal conflict, factionalism, or a revolt against the ruling class have fractured the city's cohesion, leading groups to abandon the urban center for smaller, more manageable communities. The most compelling framework, and the one that generates the most scholarly discussion, is that all these factors converged in a slow-moving crisis. A period of drought would have reduced crop yields, putting pressure on a population already straining local resources due to deforestation. As food became scarce, the authority of the ruling elite would have weakened, potentially leading to conflict or a loss of communal purpose. In this perfect storm model, there was no single cause, but a cascade of environmental and social feedback loops that made the grand urban experiment unsustainable. The legacy of Cahokia, therefore, is a profound lesson in societal fragility. Its mounds are not monuments to a sudden fall, but to a gradual transformation. The people did not vanish. Their descendants are among the Native American nations of the region. What ended was a specific, centralized way of life. The enduring mystery for archaeologists is weighting these internal pressures, a delicate calculus that asks us whether a society can become too successful for its own environment, and how quietly a great city can decide to simply stop being a city, its people choosing a different path under a changing sun. These 35 divisions are not archaeology's failures, but its very engine. Each contested site, from the silent streets of Cahokia to the cryptic gears of the Antikythera Mechanism, is a testament to the fragmentary nature of the story we are trying to piece together. We are not reading a finished book, we are assembling a library from scattered pages, many of which are missing or written in languages we have only begun to translate. The true challenge lies not in the stones or the scripts themselves, but in the chasm between our modern minds and the ancient worldviews that created them. What seemed like a practical tool to one culture might have been a sacred object to another, a king to one society, a ball player to the next. These ongoing debates force us to confront that distance, to question our assumptions, and to listen more carefully to the whispers of the past. This vibrant, often contentious conversation is what keeps history alive. It transforms a timeline of dates into a dynamic field of discovery, where every new artifact, every fresh analysis, has the power to overturn a century of thinking. The mysteries that continue to divide archaeologists are the frontiers of our understanding, reminding us that the past is not a settled fact, but an ongoing, thrilling investigation. So we turn the question to you, after this journey through 35 historical puzzles, which of these enduring mysteries do you find most compelling? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let the conversation continue.